This planet is dying. The human race is killing it.
So you've come here to help us?
No.
You said you came to save us.
I said I came to save the Earth.
You came to save the Earth. From us. You came to save the Earth. From us.
If the Earth dies, you die. If you die, the Earth survives.
We can change. We could still turn things around.
We've watched, we've waited and hoped that you would change.
Please.
It's reached the tipping point. We have to act.
Please.
We'll undo the damage you've done and give the Earth a chance to begin again.
Don't do that. Please. We could change. We can change.
The decision is made. The process has begun.
Oh, God.
And deeper we go, my beloved truth seekers. Deeper into the wastelands of matter and graveyards of broken dreams. To procure our divine spark, our misplaced childhoods and paradises lost. Deeper we go into that inner sanctum of Gnosis and those outer rectums of reality. In that soul's high adventure. We descend like a grunge Orpheus, attending Sophia, Inanna, Alice, the Shekinah, Coraline, or any of the versions of the divine feminine in those stories that plunges into the Hades of the unconscious, descends into the underworlds of our ass-raped perception to discover our long-lost sanity.
You know what crazy is? Crazy is majority rules.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
Please allow me to introduce myself and keep you company as your psychopomp of impossible secrets. I am Abraxas in his meat sack incarnation of Miguel Connor, transmitting from the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago, patiently waiting for the beginning of the world. And recently back from the Buzz Belief event, where I moderated an August debate between Justin Bass and Richard Carrier. Truly a hellacious time with the wonderful and pioneering peeps from Mythicist Milwaukee. It was a humble honor. We will do it again in October and hope to see you there. This time in the debate between Bart Ehrman and Robert Price on the historicity of Jesus Christ. Along with all those goddesses I mentioned, I'm sure. Deeper we go here at AM by Gnostic Radio, as we do every week, broadcast at the virtual Alexandria, that state of mind where East meets West, always through the GodAboveGod.com. Welcome you veterans of 1,000 psychic wars. Welcome you Revenge of the Myth, you Johnny Cash Bodhisattvas, and you Word made on flesh. Welcome to the machine, my son, and the means to escape it. Deeper we go.
As Hemingway said, there is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man. True nobility is being superior to your former self.
The Gnostic way is that the deeper you go, the further out into space you will end up. That is certainly the promise of this week's show on this April, the year of our Demiurge 2016. We have the idyllic pleasure of being joined by one of my favorite academics, a true luminary when it comes to the esoterica and all its heretical warts and wrinkles. That is Jeff Kripal, head of religious studies at Rice University, who has honored the virtual Alexandria before on such topics as the Gnostic serpent, occult themes in comic books, and the hidden gifts behind sex magic. And I had the pleasure to meet last year at the Gnostic Countercultures Conference in Houston. Jeff will be shortly discussing his new book, The Supernatural, a new vision of the unexplained. He co-wrote it with Whitley Strieber. The work continues the mystical journey of Strieber from his reality-disbanding, mind-expanding book, Communion.
I am the dreamer. You are the dream.
I think this book, The Supernatural, 2 words, will be a paradigm change. Help move the whole alien/UFO/ancient astronaut dialogue forward into more productive and insightful domains, where a healthy balance of science and psychology truly paves the way for evolutionary expansions of human consciousness. In other words, the Gnostic dialogue, as mentioned in the Gospel of Philip and Thomas and other texts. So unique, where the images are explored, entered, while the naked truths behind them are experienced for renewing transformation, where magic realism is embraced for an artistic life, and the data is followed for more sober scientific revelations, where scientific materialism and orthodoxy are finally placed outside the holy realms of wonder and curiosity. Those 2 states where humans are fully free.
As long as the Matrix exists, the human race will never be free.
In the end, the question is the answer, and the data serves best when leading to more questions. Again, it's the Gnostic way, and I've explained this way in past shows and more detail when it comes to such notions as extraterrestrials, ghosts, magic, literary classics, and other modern mythopoeia. Catch the mist, catch the myth, catch the mystery, catch the drift. Oh, you modern day Tom Sawyers, your mind not for rent by any god or government.
1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that people were alone on this planet.
Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
Jeff and Strieber's book explains what I've said a lot better, elegantly written by 2 piercing minds. Remember, Strieber never said he had an alien encounter. No, in the spirit of Philip K. Dick and Carl Jung, as seen with the exegesis and the Red Book, they experienced the otherworldly, the supernatural, 2 words, and then, with that Gnostic attitude of skepticism, curiosity, and even parody, they documented these encounters for the greater good. They became both the researcher and subject of a seemingly cruel play of visions and illusions, transcended their stories and rewrote the story of the world by their involvement in flights to imaginal realms. In other words, they wrote their own gospel and lived their own myth, even as the universe mocked them and perhaps even laid a trap of ridicule as it often does. As Philip K. Dick said in his exegesis, "We are not the artists but the drawings." Hence, Plato's concept of the cave and the idea of archetypes.
Don't you see? It's not about you. It's about them.
But I can't go back.
Don't know that you got a choice, son. No man can walk out on his own story.
You'll hear more from our interview with Jeff, but certainly check out our other interviews on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, or our archive of past shows. Certainly read The Supernatural, 2 words. Hopefully, you'll understand in the end you are the true alien, the true extraterrestrial, the watcher and the watched, the anally probed by archons, who is going deeper into those rectums of reality with those goddesses to find out your true self. And then you will go beyond the stars.
What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
You have always been here.
To end, let me use this quote that I use often by Eric Davis from his book Nomad Codes. I feel it always puts the Gnostic ethos into perspective. And I know Jeff and Strieber would agree. Here it goes. The Neoplatonists' ascent through the spheres, the Gnostics' sudden awakening, the desert monk's rejection of the Elan Vital, is not simply a philosophical error or the mark of patriarchy, but is fired by an intensely lucid yearning of the highest of goals, liberation. We don't need to expiate our crimes, but to discover and remember the way out of a false world created through no fault of our own. And this way out is way out. Gnostic texts crackle with a peculiar energy, an almost sci-fi sensibility of alien gods and supramundane universes of light. Though not the first cosmic duelists, the Gnostics may have been the first spiritual off-worlders.
I remember where I came from and how I became a human, why I hung around, and now my final departure schedule. This way out, escaping velocity, not just eternity but infinity.
Inward and outward, and led us to the interview with Jeff Kripal on the supernatural. Let us commune with the alien god of the Gnostics. Or I guess I should call him the undocumented deity to be politically correct. That's a safe space. Oh, and please support Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio in any way you can. I have started an Amazon wish list for much needed equipment, and many of you are already kindly assisting. Thank you. You can find the means to continue the success of this Red Pill Cafeteria at thegodabovegod.com. Or just shoot me an email at miguel.thegodabovegod.com. MIGUEL. Alright, this is the end of my Pandoric drivel. Really. Although I'll have some old clips on extraterrestrial encounters after the interview. Either way, hello and goodbye as always.
Whatever happened to free will?
We actually tried free will before. After taking you from hunting and gathering to the height of the Roman Empire, we stepped back to see how you do on your own. You gave us the Dark Ages for 5 centuries, until finally we decided we should come back in.
This is the AM Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined again by Jeff Kripal to discuss the new book he co-wrote with Whitley Strieber, The Supernatural, A New Vision of the Unexplained. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I'm well. I'm well, Miguel. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure interacting with you. So why don't we start with a little bit about how you came to write this book and join forces with Strieber?
Well, the short story there is that I had been working with Strieber's visitor corpus. In other words, his nonfiction books on his own contact experiences for really since about 08 or 09. And I wrote about the visitor corpus in the last chapter of Mutants and Mystics, which came out in 2011. And after that, Whitley and I corresponded for a number of years, and I invited him and his late wife, Anne, to a number of symposia at Esalen, and got to know both of them quite well. And I guess it was 2 years ago now. I proposed to Willie that we write a novel together, actually, which was probably a really bad idea since I've never written anything nonfiction. My critics all think that that's what I've always written, but in my own mind, I'm not writing fiction. And Whitley very graciously and kindly guided the proposal into a kind of nonfiction direction. And we eventually landed on this book idea, which is essentially a conversation between the two of us. We, as you know, we bounce back and forth each chapter, and we essentially have a conversation about his visitor experiences and what those might mean from a much broader kind of history of religions perspective. So we started it about a year and a half ago. It took us about 7-8 months to do, and it just came out actually about 6 weeks ago now. So that's the general history.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. I think it will move forward the dialogue of alien abductions and UFO. Isn't that the purpose of what you wanted with this book, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was, the original subtitle was something like Shifting the Conversation, and that was really the intent, was to, gosh, take a conversation that, at least in the public, is sort of schizophrenically divided between those who think, it's literally true, there are, extraterrestrials from some star system guiding human civilization, and those who think it's all complete nonsense. And we wanted to provide a much richer kind of middle space where these things could be taken as real experiences, but we don't need to fall into a particular belief system, whether that's a religious one or a Cold War sci-fi one. We wanted to sit with the question, as Whitley puts it. We didn't want to answer the question because we don't have an answer. And we wanted to be really honest about that.
It seems to me, and beyond or besides Strieber's very honesty, his humility, also a very good writer, was the idea. He reminded me a lot about two other figures that influence the show, and that is Carl Jung and Philip K. Dick, and they had experiences, and they told themselves, we are gonna become the researchers in our own story, our own unfolding imaginal mythology. Isn't that basically what the thrust of the book is, to become researchers?
Yeah, I mean, those are two figures we discuss in the book, actually, and I think that's generally correct. Jung's book on flying saucers in 1958 actually announced a number of themes that are threads that we pick up in this book and try to take a little further. And the book is very much about emergent mythologies and what that might look like up close or all around us. And I do think Whitley comes or describes his encounters in ways that are very resonant with how Dick described Valis. I think there is very much a tradition there. Both men, of course, are or were science fiction writers, and both men encountered some kind of living presence in the physical environment that had a kind of plasma or magnetic charge to it, as it were. So I think those are fair comparisons. But we're trying to do our own thing too, of course. We're not just channeling Jung or channeling Philip K. Dick, although that would be a worthy book as well, I suppose.
And it seems that both figures, maybe not Jung at first with the 7 Sermons of the Dead, they sort of kept their big works until afterwards because they sort of knew what would happen. And you even write in the Supernatural, you write, Whitley made the cardinal mistake of psychoanalysis, which is to speak exactly what appears in one's experience without self-censorship or concern about what others think. And that certainly opened a whole can.
Right. I think what I was commenting on there is that Whitley's sin was not that he followed the psychoanalytic rule and spoke his truth as exactly as he remembers it, but that he did that in public. In psychoanalysis, of course, you can be as graphic and as honest and as blatant as you want, but at the end of the day, it's in complete confidence because you're sitting there with the analyst. What Whitley did is he did that in a book that was then published in 1 million copies or however many copies were sold. So it's not a real sin in the moral sense, but it's what created the firestorm that he had to endure after the book came out. But I think he's just being honest. I think he's just telling us what he saw and what he felt and what happened, and that's punishable in our present culture, apparently.
Indeed, and one sin that I certainly make, and you talk about in the supernatural, is that of the anecdotal. And I fall into that. I've had experiences and I hang out with secular friends and I sort of say, well, it was just anecdotal. Never mind that I might look at the research of Jeff Kripal or Gary Lockman or Colin Wilson or Carl Jung and see that these experiences are happening throughout time. But I fall into the anecdotal, and that's a problem, isn't it, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I discussed that stratagem or that rhetorical move that the debunking community makes, that when they encounter an experience or an event that they don't like or they don't want to consider seriously, they just describe it as anecdotal, and it's as if, some magical spell had been cast and suddenly we don't have to think about that experience or event anymore. And what they mean by it, of course, is that it's just a one-off. It's just a statistical fluke, and that it will never happen again. And of course, that all may be true. It might be a one-off and it may not happen again, but that doesn't mean it's not real, of course. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. So my own feeling about invoking the anecdotal is that it's essentially an intellectual cop-out. It's a refusal to think about the anomalous. And it's also a missed opportunity, because the anomalous happens to push us out of the ordinary. And so to describe these things as anecdotal and to return us to the ordinary or the statistical norm is, I think, a tragedy. I think it's morally wrong. The other thing I point out in the book, of course, is that these experiences are not anecdotal. They're actually quite common, and they fit into these much larger historical patterns that are quite obvious when you actually look at history. So I think it's wrong in the moral sense, in the intellectual sense, and in the factual sense. I just think it's a cop-out, and we should just stop doing that.
Agreed, and it seems the other problem you point out in the book is, what do you call it? I have it here in the book. You talk about the two problems, which are reductive comparison and religious comparison. These experiences are either demons, or in the past with Ezekiel, there are these sort of beings that are a little bit more advanced than we are. And those two are problems, right?
Right. So what I mean by that, what I try to show is that what one thinks of the UFO phenomenon really has everything to do with how one is comparing, and what kinds of comparisons one's putting on the table. In other words, what does the UFO look like? What is it like? And people have some very naive comparative practices that I wanted to call out in the book. What I call the reductive comparisons are those people who assume the universal truth of our present worldview, in other words, materialist science and technology, and then they read that back into past historical encounters in a very forced and artificial way. And so essentially every magical or mystical event in the past becomes essentially misperceived technology. This ancient alien or ancient astronaut thesis that what these religious events in the past was essentially technologically naive pre-modern people not understanding the technology that was being used to manipulate them. That's naive because that just presumes the absolute universal truth of our present worldview and reads it back into the past. The other rational are not. The other religious forms of comparison are just as naive, but they work in the opposite direction. They presume the absolute truth of some past religious worldview, say that of the New Testament or the Torah, and then they read those assumptions forward into the present, and so an abduction event becomes a demonic assault or something. That's equally naive. You're just assuming the truth of a past worldview, and you're projecting it or reading it into the present. What we're trying to do in the supernatural is neither of those. We're admitting that there are comparisons to be made. The past religious events do look like modern UFO events. They do, actually. But we're not going to privilege our worldview or the ancient religious worldview. We're going to note those similarities, and we're going to try to move the ball forward. So that's essentially how the book unfolds, is through that refusal of the reductive and the religious comparisons.
Yeah, while reading your book, Jeff, I kept thinking of that passage in the Gospel of Philip which states, "Truth did not come into the world naked, but in types and images." So that's a good way to approach it. We're going to be cloaked in what's in our own mythology, personal views, and our state of mind at the time.
That's right. Yeah, that's a comparative strategy that you just quoted to me. It's a Gnostic strategy of comparison, and I think it works. But that's more subtle than what typically goes on with the UFO phenomenon. People assume the literal truth of some system of symbols and signs. They don't understand that whatever this reality is, it's behind the images or beyond the particular religious or imaginative framework.
So it seems to me that you're agreeing with Joseph Campbell and his famous quote, "We need a new myth. All the other myths have gotten old for us to really thrive." And as you write, the government is sort of fostering this myth by keeping things secret, but they're not doing a very good job in really nurturing the myth.
Right, or they're trying to spin the myth or control the myth, control the narrative, as the media says, in a particular direction. I mean, I do think we need a new mythology. Clearly, we need a new mythology. The old ones, they work for individuals or individual communities, but those communities then wreak havoc on the larger cultures or the global village. So we clearly need a new set of mythologies that can make sense to us and bring wonder and the sublime back into our culture, or at least our Western culture.
But at the end of the day, when you start thinking, well, it's ourselves from the future, it's parallel dimensions, and so forth, wouldn't your advice be to do the old Hindu neti neti, not this and not that, just continue observing? Or
yeah, so I have a chapter in the book called "Say Away," and that's exactly what it's about. It's listen to the interpretation or listen to the emergent myth, consider it, but also say it away, be suspicious of it, and recognize that, there's essentially a storyteller in us all and in our cultures that are spinning out all these stories. But I think the key is to get to the storyteller and not to get trapped in the stories. And that's a really hard thing to do. This is at the end of the day, this is a very elite kind of esoteric project. It's a Gnostic project. It's not something you can pull off easily or just, win an election on, say. It just doesn't work like that. It's not that.
Yeah, like you write, I think you quote Dick again saying, "We are not the artists, we are the canvas," or the story. We're supposed to absorb these energies and experiences and see what they make of us. We're embedded in their world, I think you mentioned as well, or Strieber does.
Strieber, yeah, that's Whitley. They're not embedded in our world. We're embedded in their world, like cats or dogs or monkeys are embedded in our world, and that's why we don't understand what's going on. The as William James put it, over about 100 years ago now, he was actually talking about mediums and spirits, but he was saying, we're a lot like a cat in a library. We just have absolutely no idea where we sit or what's in the books, and we're not capable of it. We're just not cognitively capable of understanding our condition in the cosmos. It's just not possible for us, at least cognitively.
And moving on to some commonalities, one of the things Strieber has been, or it became sort of, I don't know about a folk story, but a folk mockery. You mentioned this at the Gnostic countercultures. Even South Park made fun of it. It's the whole idea of anal probing and masturbation and all that. But and you're probably the best person to discuss this or deal with this because you have studied tantric and sexual magic for so long. But these ideas of what happened to Strieber really have been happening for thousands of years in the East. And, well, perhaps even with the Gnostics in Alexandria.
Oh, I think they happen everywhere. The motif of sex with spirits is absolutely everywhere. It's not just in Asia or just in the Middle East. I think these are extremely common experiences, Miguel. And the reason we think they're rare is because our cultures effectively repress them and punish people who step out and talk about them. So I think they go on all the time, and we just don't know it because they don't make the public, they never enter the public gaze. So yeah, I mean, that's how I think Whitley's kind of graphic sexual descriptions are, again, not actually unusual. They're only unusual because an eloquent professional writer put them in a book that sold lots and lots of copies. That's what makes them unusual, not the fact that they happened.
And another thing which was very interesting, and again, this is sort of the modern trope of aliens, is the idea of them placing objects in our ears, as it happened to Strieber afterwards. And there's so many other examples. But as you point out, this is actually, again, not uncommon. And one example you give is what spirits do in shamanism.
I don't know if I talk about the spirits in feminism, but you mean shamanism?
Yeah, you talk about how spirits will place objects inside humans.
Yeah. I mean, so the motif of placing, say, a crystal or a magical object in the body of a future shaman is common in the folklore on shamanism around the world. I wouldn't say it's universal, but it's something we know about. And when a man or a woman receives such a magical object or crystal, it's from the stars, it's from the heavens, and it signals some kind of religious vocation. It sets that person apart to be a holy man or a holy woman. And this is how I read Whitley's implant, is that it's one of these traditional religious callings or crystals, as it were, that was implanted into his body, but that he and we, for that matter, all lack a kind of cultural mythology to make sense of that anymore. So it just looks kind of bizarre because our culture is too, forgive the expression, spiritually stupid. We just no longer have any context for these experiences, and so when they happen, they appear to have no framework. They appear to be bizarre or absurd, when in fact they actually make a lot of sense if you know something about the folklore or the history of shamanism. So again, that's my role in the book, is to basically show again and again and again that what looks bizarre or absurd in Cold War America actually is neither, if you place it in this broader historical perspective.
And of course, it doesn't make sense even when you take again the common trope, because as you mentioned, if these advanced beings wouldn't have to tag us like cattle, they could follow us through our electromagnetic residues or DNA. I mean, they don't have to run around chasing us.
Well, and lots of people have pointed this. Jacques Vallée pointed this out 45 years ago, that the the literal kind of technological readings make no sense, because the medical procedures you see in abduction events are almost all using medical technology that's actually more primitive than what we already have. So it just makes no sense as a literal operation or some kind of a tagging project, as you say. It's clearly about something else. It's clearly functioning in some kind of symbolic, spiritual way.
And we have another point of comparison. I don't know, I forgot who you quote, but you talk about how St. Paul was the first abductee, and even he got implanted. He talks about a messenger of Satan put a thorn in his flesh.
Right. That's actually David Halperin. David is a colleague of mine who spent his whole career actually studying the history of Jewish mysticism, including the chariot mysticisms of early Kabbalah. And David has a wonderful blog called Journal of a UFO Investigator, and the St. Paul comparison with the alleged implant is straight from David's blog. Again, he's very careful about it. David is not saying that St. Paul was abducted by aliens. He's saying that whatever happens to modern abductees when they receive implants has something to do with, or may have something to do with, say, St. Paul's experience of being implanted with a thorn in the flesh. But we don't actually know what the common source or common cause is there. We just know that the two experiences look alike. And that's the kind of comparison I'm proposing in the book, is that very careful, let's look at similarities, but let's not draw the causal arrow one way or the other.
And another commonality or parallel is they seem to, abductees or people with extraterrestrial experiences tend to see, or often or sometimes see their dead. And Strieber talks about in one part of the book, Supernatural, how he felt his mother's presence. But seeing the dead, that happens everywhere, right, Jeff?
Well, this was the idea of Anne Strieber, Whitley's late wife. Anne was the person who collated and organized the hundreds of thousands of letters that Whitley received from readers after communion out. And what Anne discovered reading through these letters was that a number of these abduction events involved seeing a dead loved one during the event. Sometimes somebody would see an acquaintance or a family member that they thought was alive, but would find out after the abduction event that in fact had died. So Anne's conclusion, after many years of reading these letters, was that this abduction phenomena has something to do with what we call death. But again, she left that observation very open-ended. But it's another clue, another very strong clue, that whatever these abduction events are, they probably are not about, kick the tire technology or extraterrestrials from them. They're somehow related to the afterlife and to immortality. This, by the way, is what Ken Arnold thought too. The man who really began the whole flying saucer mythology was a businessman named Ken Arnold, and he saw 9 whizzing somethings over Yakima, Washington, in on June 24th, 1947, and he reported them immediately because it was the Cold War, and the assumption was that the Soviets might invade from that part of the country. And a journalist on the ground named Bill Beckett heard Arnold describe them as skipping across the sky like pie plates or saucers, and Beckett then coined the phrase "flying saucer." But what Arnold actually saw, according to his daughter, was that these things were alive and that they likely came from some other dimension, and that this is some other dimension where we go when we die. So Arnold held a conviction that was actually very close to what Anne Strieber held, but which is very much at odds, I think, with the kind of flying saucer craze that you see in the 1950s and 60s in all of the movies.
I like how you in one part of the book, I think Strieber is writing about how everything is a bad sci movie, and he says what we need to do now is make better sci-fi movies so that we can have better contact experiences. Again, the story unfolds as we become more sophisticated.
Right. This is what's so wonderful about Whitley, is he's so aware of the way he himself is shaping the event. But it doesn't follow that the event's not real or true. It means something profound. It means that we are involved in the production of our own religious states and our own contact with other forms of reality. And so what he calls for is exactly what you said. We need to make better science fiction movies so that when we have an abduction, it can be more positive and more nuanced and more sophisticated. And essentially that's what this book is about, actually. It's essentially that movie. It's essentially that piece of public culture that's designed to help us have better contact experiences.
And one thing I found out, I wasn't that aware, was that Strieber, he was already very embedded, as you would say, in the occult. He was a follower of Gurdjieff and Uspensky. He meditates. He was a lay scholar of ancient alternative Christianity and so forth. Do you think these things helped open his channels and basically drew him to his experience? Or we just don't know?
Well, we don't know, but I think those kinds of spiritual practices and reading practices are what helped make Communion such a sophisticated book. I mean, it's very nuanced. Whitley complains in our book that people misread Communion and read him as arguing that it was all literal aliens, when in fact he was not arguing that. And you can see Gurdjieff, you can see Meister Eckhart, you can see a kind of underlying Gnosticism, frankly, in Communion and in the later books, if you know what you're looking for. I think that kind of passed over the heads or under the heads of a lot of readers, but I think that's of immense significance, actually. I think it's really key to the whole Whitley Strieber story.
I would agree. And keeping with the theme of the Gnostics, in one section, you quote Christopher Noel saying the Gnostics were history's first flying saucer cult. Could you maybe explain that for the listener, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, have you ever had Chris on, by the way, Miguel?
Oh, several times, yeah, and I do read The Secret Sun when I can, but...
Yeah, no, Chris is great. I think what Chris meant by that is that, if you look at early Gnosticism, what you essentially see is a very eclectic group of individuals and communities that are really articulating beings of light or divine beings coming out of the sky, out of the stars, or out of the heavens, and granting or revealing to people essentially Gnosis, or the revelation that there's a divine spark inside them, and that their true home lies beyond the stars. So I think what Chris is saying there is that there are real resonances between the early Gnostic myths and the later flying saucer myths, and that we do well to think about that.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. And going a bit back on the topic of sex, wouldn't you say that sex is ultimately gnosis? It's the passing off of information and beyond just genetic coding?
Well, it's the passing on of incredible amounts of information in terms of DNA. I mean, wow. I mean, just amazing amounts of information. But the other thing about sexuality, which I don't think we understand, is that in some circumstances, sexual arousal and sexual activity somehow open the individual or the couple up to intrusions from beyond, as it were. They somehow, in Jenny Wade's language, lift the veil. And I don't think we have any clue how that happens or why it happens in some cases and not in others. But it clearly happens. So I think, for me, human sexuality is finally numinous and a mystery. And to the extent we talk about it only in biological or physical terms, I think we miss what it's fundamentally about. And I think that comes out in the abduction events, many of which are profoundly sexualized and are essentially about some kind of hybridity, some kind of human-divine fusion, which of course is central to a lot of mythology as well.
And for the listener, Jeff definitely it gives or grants sort of a framework where you can make your way in this sort of modern Gnostic approach to understanding UFOs and alien abduction and extraterrestrial experiences. He even lists them here, and we've already touched upon some of them, like say away, historically contextualize, interpret and double imagine, and of course say away. Could you discuss some of the other points? Like here's one: listen for the traumatic secret.
Yeah, so we included an appendix at the back of the book, and it lists, how many are there? I don't know if I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 9. There are 9 essentially tools for thinking about anomalous events in your life. I can list them. They're compare, make a cut, historically contextualize, interpret and doubly imagine, practice in erotics, say away, listen for the traumatic secret, think in terms of an energetics, and finally say again. Listen for the traumatic secret is about look for connections between a mystical experience and some previous traumatic experience. What you often find when you're reading mystical literature, or abduction literature for that matter, is that the person or the individual involved had some deeply traumatic event earlier in life, say a brain injury, or they were sexually abused, or they were emotionally traumatized, or whatever the case might be, and that then later in life they experience these intrusions or abductions or ecstasies that seem to be correlated somehow with the earlier abduction event. And what Whitley and I both observe is that that's not necessarily a causal argument. We're not arguing that the trauma causes the later event as if it were some kind of hallucination, but rather what the trauma does is it essentially cracks open the psyche or the ego so that later on down the life cycle the person is open, as we say, to other forms of mind and reality. There's a kind of breaking in that can happen. And so what that particular tool in the toolbox of the book says is just look for that, be aware of that, and don't assume some kind of causal, arrow there. But the example I always give, Miguel, is the near-death experience. Now, well, near-death experiences are obviously correlated with traumatic events, right? you don't have a near-death experience eating an ice cream cone, at your local drugstore. You have a near-death experience because you're in the midst of a profound physical trauma. You're in a car accident, or you just had a heart attack, or you're drowning or something. That doesn't mean that the trauma is producing some hallucination that we call an NDE. It could just as well mean that the trauma is cracking you open as an ego and as a body, and you're actually experiencing the broader world now during this NDE. And so that's what we're essentially arguing in the book.
And in the list, and interesting, you had 9 because Strieber talks about one of the encounters, the 9 knocks on the door in threes.
I didn't think of that. That's a good one.
Yeah. Freemason inside of you came out or something.
I'll point that out to Whitley, but no, I did not intend that. But I'll take it.
And one of them is thinks in terms of energetics. And of course, this is, you bring up the plasma, and Strieber definitely talks about plasma. And this goes to the Philip K. Dick and the pink beams of light in his 2374. So that's an important one, and also very mythological. We see the light.
Right. And the important thing there is that if you think about these experiences as some kind of encounter with an energy or a plasma, you don't have to reason about them, but you can resonate with them literally. That an energetic being might be able to fuse with us or resonate with us in a very literal, physical way that might be completely inaccessible to human reason, but might be directly accessible through our own energetic form or soul.
And one thing, a bit on a side note, and but it was in your book, Jeff, you talk about how you groan internally whenever you're on a plane and somebody asks you, what do you do? And you say, I'm a professor of religion, and they immediately pigeonhole you as somebody who just spends time wondering about the synoptics or something like that. Could you tell us about that story or that your own encounter with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's in the introduction in a little section called What to Say on a Plane. And, it's the classic situation. You're strapped into a seat with some stranger and you're bored out of your mind, and the person asks you what you do. And so I get that question all the time. And it's just always a problem because no matter what I say, they're going to misunderstand it because there's no precedent for what professors of religion do in the broader culture. When you tell them you're a professor of religion, they think you're a priest or a minister, and you're out to convert people to something. They've never encountered anybody who studies religion professionally, so they have no way of understanding what it is you do. So I invoked that scene in the introduction because I thought it was really important that the reader understand what it is I do and what it is I'm going to do in the book, and what it is I'm not going to do. That's just as important to understand. So that's what to say on a plane.
Yeah, it seems even in a secular level, most people think that a professor of history is simply, of religions, he's simply a historian. He records history. But in your capacity, you do more than just record history.
Right. And of course, that's a long conversation, though, isn't it? I mean, how do you say that on a plane, or how do you say that in a cocktail party? Do people even drink cocktails anymore? I don't know. Yeah, I know it's an odd expression. It's sort of like places you in 1963 or something. I don't know.
With the martini lunches.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's a real problem. Because of course, we do a lot more than just history. And what we do when we start to theorize about religion, I suppose we are entering the realm of what people think about as religion, but not in any traditional way. So again, it's just a real challenge. And that was the challenge of the book again, was to try to get people to see what a professional student of religion does and how he or she thinks and how that might change how we talk about something like the UFO phenomenon.
And Jeff, what would you, I guess is the part of the show with the famous, what advice do you give? For example, you might be getting emails, people saying they have, not asking you what you do, but I've had an experience. What should I do? For example, I had an extraterrestrial experience about 7 years ago, but thankfully at the time I was studying a lot of Gnosticism, so I had the framework. And
Right.
I had plenty of frameworks. I was able to, again, basically use the toolbox of your book before you wrote it, before you gave them names. And of course, you have even better advice in it. What would you tell people that, again, send you emails going, oh my God, Jeff, I just had an experience. What do I do now? Besides buy the book.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why we wrote the book. I mean, we really wrote it. That's one audience we really wrote the book for. And I really do put together a toolbox in the book of these 9 tools. Our editor was very insistent and enthused about that particular part of the book. He really wanted it to be practical and a kind of how-to manual for the abductee or contactee. So, I mean, I would very humbly say, please go read the book. It would be nice if you bought it. Please go read it, but definitely read it. And if you want to talk about it, I'm here to talk about it with you. I mean, I really am interested, and I really do care. But go read the book first, because we spent 7 months of our lives trying to put down on the page what someone could do in that situation. So it just makes sense to take a close look at what we said there. So that would be my advice.
And you're still friends. You're friends with Strieber. I get from his book, he seems to live, I wouldn't say an exciting life. It's almost a dark life between the people threatening him on one side and the sort of magic realist life he lives. How's he doing?
Well, I think a lot of the harassment and the threats those are things of the past. I think those were deeply troubling to Whitley. I think Whitley would have to speak for himself, but I think he feels very misunderstood very often. And again, that was one of the points of the book. I certainly wanted people to understand Whitley the way I think I understand him. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything he writes, but I think once you understand why he writes it, it's a different ballgame. It's very much a different world at that point. So I think Whitley suffered a lot for his honesty and his courage, and I think, like a lot of writers, he's paid the price for what he's written. Writing is not free. To be a public intellectual is not for the faint of heart. I mean, there are real costs, and he's paid them. So I think that's my sense of him anyway. He would have his own way to articulate that, of course.
Well, it's very nuanced, but at the same time, I think it's very clear. Again, he's sharing his experiences, and again, hopefully you and Strieber are moving the dialogue forward away from this tired narrative we've had, again, for the last 30 years.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today, Jeff. I'd like to thank you very much for coming once again on Aeon Bide, honoring us, and discussing your new and very august and very stimulating book, The Supernatural, A New Vision of the Unexplained.
Thanks, Miguel. I really appreciate the interview, as always.
About if there are aliens, that they would be advanced to the point we might as well see them as Mothmen at a Starbucks. Funny how in Hollywood movies, aliens can travel across vacuum, but they are maybe 100 years or so more advanced than humans. You know, still using some propulsion transportation, hand-to-hand combat, and organized like a reptilian or insect North Korean government. I'm sure this is all because of our innate fear of technology, the rise of the machines around the corner, as well as a subconscious realization that reptiles and insects are truly the superior species on this planet and will be around long after Gaia aborts us out of her uterus. As for me, I have had a UFO experience, but I pretty much keep it to myself until I have time to research it further, examine my brain one of these days when I'm sane, or when there is further downloading from the pleroma. I'm focused on the truth, not the types and images I spoke about in the introduction. To end, let me quote the truly sublime and Sophia words of my friend James West or Haymarket, who perfectly captures this episode. Quote, "Call it a bit of a cautionary, dualistic counterweight to the high that some New Agers get upon contemplating benevolent interactions with our alien friends. It's a thought I've had for a very long time, one that comes in the form of a maxim that I take to be self-evident, from Arthur C. Clarke, who said, 'Any sufficiently developed technology is indistinguishable from magic.' And I say, any sufficiently developed alien being is indistinguishable from a god. Now, per that statement, one can feel free to substitute the words spiritual entity for God. In addition, it's well worth noting that you can reverse the logic of the statement, so that you just as easily might say, any sufficiently developed spiritual entity is indistinguishable from an advanced alien being. The logic is quite simple. If we can imagine an alien race that has evolved to the utmost extent, and why shouldn't we, then one can presume that such a race of being would have developed the very same abilities that human beings have always aspired to in their wildest dreams, such as the ability to see everything and to know everything, the ability to fly, not merely across the sky, but across the cosmos and through infinite dimensions. And let's not forget the ability to be invisible, or else the ability to move through any objects with ease, or for that matter, any given space. Needless to say, this should include the ability to be impervious to danger or pain all along the way, yet at the same time, we should like the ability to experience, well, absolutely everything and anything we desire, not to mention the ability to create or destroy whatever we wish, as we wish. To say the least, we'd want to possess everything we want, or better still, we'd want the ability to be anything or anyone we want to be. And, moreover, to do so wherever and whenever and whoever we like. And I might add, for whatever reason we choose. That is, we would seek to develop nothing less than the power of the most advanced spiritual beings known to man or imagined by man. More simply put, we would seek to be all that can be, or as the Bible puts it, to bloweth wherever we listeth. In short, just like us, any sufficiently developed alien race would be like to become gods. After all, it's the ultimate aspiration and the ultimate evolution, isn't it? But then, as always, be careful what you wish for. As you might have noticed, the problem with gods and their unlimited power is that it's decidedly alien from our experience as human beings. From the standpoint of human experience, gods have a decided tendency to act in ungodly ways, or perhaps even worse, to act in godly ways. As you might have noticed, unlimited power always seems to yield some very mysterious limits. Oh, not for the gods themselves, of course, but rather for us, the beings for whom they reserve their limits as they go about the business of expressing their unlimited power. Given our existential condition, one wonders if it's wise to invite God into your life, or else sufficiently developed alien beings. The net result just might be a contraction of consciousness and potential rather than an expansion of consciousness or actualization of our full potential. That is, unless you're free of the gods, there's every likelihood that you'll be contracted into their limits of their desire. In fact, might it not explain your existing limits? The fact that you can't see everything or know everything or, well, bloweth wherever you listeth, just like they can. In other words, you just might consider the fact that alien beings and alien gods have already got you exactly where they want you, prescribed within the limits of their desires. It could be that alien contact is the last thing we need, but then, if aliens are as advanced as we imagine, they've already made contact. They're already with us and in us, but we know it not. In which case, the best advice might be to figure out how they work, and then set ourselves free from them. But for that to happen, I suspect that you'll need to become a sufficiently advanced being yourself. Hello and goodbye as always. Please support Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio in any way you can. A few shekels here or there. Join my Patreon campaign. Buy some of me reality-disbanding, mind-expanding books like Voices of Gnosticism, Heretic, or Stargazer. Subscribe to our archive of past shows. Your continued donations keep this Red Pill cafeteria open. The various avenues to assist me are found at thegodabovegod.com. Support alternative media away from the few corporations that own all mainstream media. I should mention that I am an Amazon.com affiliate, so any books you order from thegodabovegod.com grant me a kickback. In fact, if you order anything, whether it's clothes, appliances, or sex toys, click through the site and I will get a kickback from that as well. Even if you don't order anything advertised at thegodabovegod.com. Much appreciation to you, Knights of Valis, Shining Crazy Diamonds, and Rainbows in the Dark who support this blasphemy.